on the federal level of unprecedented hostility. At the worst we've had from administrations from, say, 1970s on is indifference. Let us remember that Richard Nixon signed the Rehab Act. He did it reluctantly, but he signed it. Ronald Reagan, who was no friend of folks with disabilities, did help the federal government create the concept of Medicaid waivers. And that's the reason why I was able to benefit in 1983 from the first Medicaid waiver in Illinois. George H. Bush, the first Bush, whichever one it was, signed the ADA. Bill Clinton was okay, but he at least wasn't an obstacle, and he did do some good things, not as many as he could have or said he would, but he at least was not an obstacle. George W. Bush, in spite of everything else he was, sincerely had what he considered an affinity for folks with disabilities. And the money follows the person came out of his administration. Barack Obama was pretty much like Bill Clinton, did okay, but at least wasn't an obstacle. What we have now is actually obstacles. People that actually want to try to turn the clock back, that are trying to regress. A couple of concrete examples of that. The bill that was introduced to what they call block grant Medicaid would have been a huge, and still could come back, would have been a huge setback for folks with disabilities. Because as Medicaid stands now, it's an entitlement, and it's based on states get reimbursed a certain percentage of money based on whatever their Medicaid expenses are. And that percentage stays the same. The money may go up or down depending on how much is spent. A block grant would say you only get so much money and you got to make it fit. That's a cut. You can call it a block grant, but that's a cut. And we feared that had that gone through, that would force states, because of this home and community-based services that I'm talking about, the home services program is optional, that would have forced states to make cuts there on optional programs because they have to keep other programs around. Fortunately, if you saw the protests that came out of that, where people were getting arrested in Washington in response to that, that was adapt. And fortunately, that has so far helped keep that from becoming reality. There was also a bill that just passed through the House last week called H.R. 620, which is very comically titled the ADA Education and Restoration Act. And what the reason why it's comical is because it does everything but that. But you know how they always call it something that's for your own good. And essentially what that does is Title III of the ADA picks up where the Rehab Act left off. Rehab Act covered public facilities. ADA covers everything that's public, even a private facility that serves the public, like a restaurant. The Rehab Act would not have covered that, but the ADA does that. So here's an example I use in my life. Around the corner from me, where I live, is a restaurant. It used to be called Blackie's. It's now been remodeled. It's called Half Sour. But it's been there as long as I lived there, which is 23 years, and it's always had a step on the front. And why haven't I ever sued? Well, suing is kind of a pain, you know, and you kind of say, okay, I'm going to go sue them someday, but then you think, I got to go to federal court. And so it's not like you can just snap your fingers and make something accessible. So it's daunting enough as it is. But under the ADA Title III, if I wanted to, I could go to federal court and try to get Blackie's to get rid of that step in the front. If the ADA, if the 620 passes, it would add an additional step. It would require me to first write a letter to the proprietor telling them exactly what it is that they are doing wrong. And then they would have 60 days to reply. And then if they reply within the 60 days, they would then get another 120 days to not fix the problem, but make, quote, substantial progress toward fixing the problem. All this before I could go through the even more daunting, or the already daunting process of going to court. So you have to do all of that before you could even go to court, which is a pretty big retreat from the ADA. And there's, of course, lots of arguments against it, but if you want to ask questions about that later, we can. It's up to you. But this is the kind of thing now, it's like out and out hostility and out trying to turn things backwards is what we face today. But I think the social movement's really the indicator is if you can look around you in today's world and see a difference of what they've done. You can point to something, and I believe what I talked about, you can do that without going very far at all. There's three things I think that there's three ways you can see the difference that what I just told you all about is done. You can walk right down the Roosevelt Road, and you can stand on the corner and you can wait for the next bus to come by. And that bus will have a ramp that comes out, and the person in a wheelchair will be able to roll on. That's because of the work of the people that helped bring about the ADA and made sure it was strong. And if you get on that bus and you roll about maybe 4 blocks to the east toward downtown, you'll pass several blocks of condo buildings that are small. They're like 4 stories high. There's a whole development. I think it's called Roosevelt Square, but it's pretty much between Ashland and Racine on Roosevelt. You see them on both sides of the street. You may have passed them already. If you do pass those by, take a look at them, and you'll notice that the first floor of every one of those buildings is flat. The entrance is flat. And that's because those buildings were built after 1983. That's because the Fair Housing Amendments Act says 2 things in regards to disability. It says all new buildings built that are housing that are more than 4 units have to be accessible. And one of the ways that they have to be accessible is that they have to have a flat entrance. All of those buildings are an example of that law at work. And if that law wasn't there, I sincerely doubt that those buildings would have flat entrances on them. So you can ride this bus and you can ride right past those buildings, and you can see 2 examples of laws that folks have brought about that are more than just theoretical, that have actually made life much easier for me than it was for Ed Roberts, and for people in the future than it was for me. And the 3rd example is sitting right in front of you, and that's me. And like I told you, the reason I'm here today is because people came in the morning and they got me out of bed, and I will take a cab home, and there will be someone there to help me do the same tonight, and there will be someone there to help me do the same tomorrow. And I'm able to live life and be here today and talk to all of you about all of this. And that's because of the work that a lot of people have done throughout many years as part of the great movement. So I think we can look around and see all those things and see how it really works and feel good about it and go out and try to do some more tomorrow. And thanks everybody for listening.
Can we take a few minutes for questions?
Sure.
Okay, so if people want to ask questions, and then maybe you could repeat it to make sure that
Okay.
people hear it. How's that sound? So till About 7 o'clock? Sound good to you?
or whatever you want.
Okay, great, thanks.
The paper it said till 8, so that's how long I got. Yes.
So, do you think the ADA is sufficient, and if it's not, what changes would you like to see to it?
Sufficient, no. And actually, that does bring me into one other thing that I probably should have talked about, and that is a piece of legislation that ADAPT is getting behind now called the Disability Integration Act. And what that would do is extend the ADA to make the kind of home and community-based services that I'm speaking about a civil right, to where I could actually take action against the state for not offering them. So that's probably the biggest hole in the ADA, is that it doesn't cover that particular aspect of living with a disability. So that would be the one area where I think once we get that passed, it would be pretty comprehensive. Enforcement, of course, is always a problem, especially when you have to leave it up to people like Jeff Sessions to do. But you know, there is a right of private action, fortunately. Although, as I told you, with 620, that you know, who knows even how long that'll be around. But I think that's the biggest hole in the ADA, is that it doesn't cover home and community-based services. Yes.
So for individuals with disabilities who are currently in nursing homes or institutions
Right.
who would like to start living in the community, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about like the obstacles they would face to getting out of the nursing home, and then some of the supports that ADAPT or other organizations help provide.
Sure. So it brings us back to the MFP, money follows the person. But let's first talk about how people get into nursing homes. It is extremely easy to do. You basically, if you have any kind of a disability, nursing homes will pretty much take whatever you got. You know, I heard someone say once that she had a quote-unquote nervous condition and ended up in a nursing home. But it's very easy to get into a nursing home. And then it is almost impossible to get out. Why is that? Well, because you lose your home probably, you lose every connection to the community. When you're in a nursing home and you have Social Security, they're allowed by state and federal law to take all of that and leave you only $30 a month. That's how much money you have to spend and to live on when you're in a nursing home. So, if you want to get out, how are you going to pay for the first month's rent, utility deposits? Who's going to even take you when you're that buried in a hole? Well, how are you going to buy your furniture? How are you going to get your utilities hooked up? Where are you going to get all the costs associated with moving out of a nursing home? So that's what you're up against to get out of one if you don't have a family to go back to, or a lot of money, or which most of us don't. What places have done, like Access Living is the CIL in Chicago, Center for Independent Living. And I neglected to say that what Ed Roberts started in Berkeley is now spread all over the world. There are CILs all over the world, and Access Living is the one in Chicago. What Access Living and other CILs have done is use the money from Money Follows the Person to help some people get out of nursing homes by using that money to pay for all these costs and get them started, get them out of a nursing home and on their feet. There is also a series of lawsuits in Illinois that challenge the idea of keeping people in various institutions that bear the names of the main plaintiffs. In the case of folks with disabilities, the main plaintiff's name is Colbert. So the Colbert lawsuit requires the state to make sure that a certain number of people move out of nursing homes and to use funds to pay for the kinds of things that I say, that I've just told you about, the upfront cost, the things that make it hard for people to get out. So that's among the ways that people have used to get out of nursing homes. But as you can see, it's much, much easier to get in than it is to get out.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Last question.
Okay, so you've talked about, in the past several decades, how there's been changing in policy and legislation that affects people with disabilities. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the cultural changes in perception and attitudes towards people with disabilities that you've experienced or from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, obviously that shifted quite a bit, and I think it has to do with somebody I knew once when we were fighting with the CTA was one day talking about how it was important to her to ride buses, not just because she wanted to get around, but because she wanted to get around with other people. And what she meant by that was, like for instance, at the time, the CTA with the propaganda of it's going to take 15 minutes to load someone on the bus and all these terrible things. Well, when it actually happens and you see it happen, you realize it's BS. And it makes it, it's a lot harder to maintain, it's much easier to maintain stigma about people you don't know and about people you don't have contact with, about people you've never seen or met. And when you see him meet and mix with people, it's obviously much harder to maintain negative stigma against them. So I think the fact that we have gotten around more and come out more has made people in general more willing to just view folks in the same way that they do other folks. There are still, however, huge pockets of institutional ignorance and institutional bias. I think that there are very large pockets of very intentional discrimination, people that know damn well that they're not treating you right, but do it anyway because they own a nursing home or something and they make billions of dollars off of the fact that you're a captive audience. And even though they know damn well that it's not right, they'll do it anyway. And the only way to really fight back against that is to realize that it's not all a matter of education. It's not all a matter of, well, if we just keep persuading them, someday they're going to see the light. And that's one of the things I love about the ADAPT approach, is that they make you deal with it. They don't just wait for you to come around. So, yes, it has improved quite a bit, and but you still do run into quite a bit of pockets of ignorance, people thinking laws don't apply to them, and when people loving laws until you try to make them obey it, and then they don't love it so much anymore, that kind of thing.
Thanks very much, really appreciate it. So for the enrolled students, we're gonna take a 10-minute break and then come back.